Hello, my name is Lydia, and I will be presenting a focused tasting session that will be on Wednesday, June 14th, about green teas, how to market green teas and a better way to do so, and a better story to tell about green teas. Green tea is perhaps the quintessential China tea. In terms of processing, it's relatively simple. Very little manipulation is done to these teas. And in fact, that's one of the appealing features of green teas, is that it is so basic and so close to as natural as we see in teas. Many people are drawn by this feature of green teas. When they make their journey into exploring teas, they start with green teas, and they've also heard that green teas are healthy. But I think sometimes this claim that green teas are healthy gets in the way of a better appreciation of the pleasures that are to be found in green teas. I'd like to focus on the features that make green teas really enjoyable and how we go about discovering the story. We also read about growth in the specialty tea industry with a focus on premium level teas, and much of this applies to green teas. How do we meet this challenge of accounting for sometimes what are very expensive green teas? How do we establish what good values are? In this class, through tasting and visual inspection, you can expect to learn about how to establish benchmark teas, to calibrate your expectations, and to identify good value. As a judge for the North American Tea Competition, one of the main criteria that we have for assessing a tea is how true to character it is. And this is something we'll be focused on very heavily in this tasting session. Green teas, as I've said before, are pretty simply made. They're withered, heat is applied to stop any further chemical changes from happening, followed by rolling and drying. And so we have this conundrum before us. How do we reconcile different expectations from the consumer? On the one hand, people are interested in green teas because of their very simplicity. But because of their minimalist processing, sometimes their flavor is found wanting. Green teas are considered delicate. They're sometimes called lean or even austere in offering a brew that is quite different, say, from the complexity of an oolong. How do we reconcile these different expectations from consumers? Just because it is a minimalist tea, does that mean that the flavor also has to be minimalist? How do we get beyond this? And how do you tell the story of good green teas and present that to your customers? For this workshop, I assume basic knowledge of green tea processing. And something I'd like to focus on instead is the relationship between leaf style and flavor. Have you ever wondered or taken note of the fact that for such a simply made tea, the green teas show more leaf styles, more leaf shapes than any other tea category? Black teas, yes, there are spirals and then there are tea buds, but most black teas are wiry, long-leafed or short-leafed. White teas are pretty standard looking. You have the silver needles and the open style of Mudan teas. Oolongs can be divided basically into two types, the semi-bald and the long leaf teas of the northern Fujian area from which they come. But if you stop and think about green teas, we see gunpowder teas rolled into pellets. We see very open leaf teas. We see wiry teas. We see needles. We see spear shapes, spirals, all manner of different types of leaves. Well, what is the intent? What was the intent of the tea maker in creating these shapes, and how do they relate to the flavor that was the desired result? We'll be looking at different cultivars. We'll consider the importance of place in green teas, and in the process help you identify some benchmark teas for this category. I will be bringing over a dozen teas for us to look at simply for leaf style, and to talk about what expectations we can have simply from looking at the finished shapes. And then we'll be tasting about 14 or so teas, over a dozen teas, which is quite intensive for a session like this. But I think during the course of the tasting, you will be able to focus on freshness and purity. I hope these will enliven your palate. We'll taste some competition-worthy teas, but we'll also find some that are good value everyday teas. And finally, at the close of the class, I will give you wholesale prices for all the teas we've tasted, so you have a good gauge of what values are associated with which teas. So I hope you'll join me. This will be a very hands-on experience with a lot of tasting of some very good green teas, and the timing works very well. By June, almost all of the spring green teas from this season will have come in. Thank you. Hope to see you then.